At Infracorp, we are setting a new vision for prosperity, molding the cities of the future. Focusing on creating a sustainable social infrastructure for the communities we invest in and delivering an enduring positive impact to all by elevating the quality of living and making positive change on our societies. Understanding that economic growth must be in balance with Earth's natural support system, with over 250 million square feet of land banked between MENA and South Asia, and a diverse portfolio of businesses, mixed-use developments and social infrastructure that is valued at over $3 billion. Our global presence is ever growing. Our sustainable future has begun. At Infracorp, we are setting a new vision for prosperity, molding the cities of the future. Focusing on creating a sustainable social infrastructure for the communities we invest in and delivering an enduring positive impact to all by elevating the quality of living and making positive change on our societies. Understanding that economic growth must be in balance with Earth's natural support system, with over 250 million square feet of land banked between MENA and South Asia, and a diverse portfolio of businesses, mixed-use developments and social infrastructure that is valued at over $3 billion. Our global presence is ever growing.
Hello everyone, and thank you very much for those who have joined us after lunch for our fifth panel. Now this panel is going to discuss future cities, environments that promote and enable sustainable living. Before we start the panel, may I please request that all of you at the back, if you can please come closer, come in front. They told me it's mandatory and not optional. قالوا لي في جوائز. I doubt that we have prizes, but please, anyone who's in the back, if we can gather in the middle, even in those sofas, it will be a much more interactive session, and it will be much more easier for our panelists. Now, in this panel, Critical to a net zero world is the reimagining and building of cities for the future. This session will look at how MENA governments and developers are planning for and creating low-carbon communities that will introduce new paradigms. The discussion will focus on the many stakeholders and their roles in envisioning, building, and operating energy-efficient, low-emissions environments. We will aim to showcase some global success stories and some of the most innovative and forward-thinking players and projects in the region. Experts will delve into the kinds of designs, materials, infrastructure, and technologies being used to create and power cleaner, greener cities. Importantly, we will also look at how these cities of the future can help accelerate a shift in mindset and behaviors by providing environments that enable people to embrace new, more sustainable ways of living, coming together and moving about their lives. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let us please together welcome our speakers. Fethi Kredar, Managing Director, Head of Middleeast and North Africa and Fifth Wall; Michael Wing, Head of International Portfolios, Infracorp; Matt Brown, Chief Sustainability, Expo City Dubai; Madav Bagwat, Founder and CEO, 2000 Watt Smart Cities; and our moderator, Ms. Ziba Askar, President of the CFA Society, Bahrain.
Good afternoon, everyone. So as I was walking here, Zahra warned me, please come in the front. It will give us also as a panelist more energy, and also it could increase the interactivity of the session. So I would like to welcome the panel, and I think since most of us have had a delicious lunch and there is pressure on us to keep the session upbeat, I think the beauty of this session is basically we are reimagining the future, and it is something that is open for imagination, basically, because there is so much in sustainability, and I know throughout the day there were so many interesting discussions, but I think let's have this session on a lighter note. Let's think of creative things. Let's think of things that didn't happen, but we want them to happen. And I think that's the beauty when we talk about cities, because cities is very much the places we live in. And we all want improved lifestyles. We all want better weather, especially in Bahrain. And I think that's what we will be touching upon in this panel. And I'm very pleased to be joined by diverse background experts who will be adding about how they are doing it on a day-to-day basis, what innovations, what ideas they have. So I would like to ask the panelists to each introduce themselves and share with you a bit about their background, so you know the context of where they are coming and sharing their ideas with you. So we'll start with you, Fethi.
Good afternoon. My name is Fethi Kredar. I head the presence of Fifth Wall in the Middle East. Fifth Wall is a US venture capital firm. We're the largest and most active investor in all real estate focused technology. And within that, there's two kind of areas. One is pure prop tech, which is kind of software solutions helping to optimize real estate portfolios and businesses. And the other strategy is climate tech, helping to decarbonize the real estate industry. And we're about $3 billion in terms of AUMs. One interesting thing is that half our capital comes from the real estate industry. So we have about 115 real estate owners, operators, and developers that have invested with us and partnered with us. And partly, and the main reason for that is because they want to access new technologies to help them optimize or decarbonize their businesses.
Thank you, Fethi. I will try and keep it lighter, and I'm hoping that people will move forward a bit, otherwise I'm going to feel very self-conscious that really no one wants to hear us. My name is Mike Wing. I'm the head of Infracorp's International Development Portfolio. As any of you have looked at the slides behind us during lunch, probably not because you were having lunch, we've got about 250 million square feet of land which we are actively developing at the moment. We're an unusual development company in that we do operate under an issued green sukuk valued at about $900 million almost $1 billion, just to make it easy. And the team, and I'm lucky to be joined by some of the team down there, but I'm very lucky that we have a really enthusiastic team and board who help us to really drive our goals, which are really focused on environmental sustainability. And I don't say that glibly, I don't say that lightly. I know that as a developer, you will often hear us talk about sustainable development goals, and often you'll see developers just sticking a bit of double glazing on a building or something like that and saying that, okay, that's energy efficient. That is not our driving goal at all, it really isn't. We are designers, we are a team of designers who are very engaged in projects from the land up to completion of the project. And we engage actively in creating communities through design, through really clever, thoughtful design. I'd like to think that we're clever. It's my team that are clever. I just simply sit around and take the credit for them being clever. But the reality is that I do think, and Madhav, who I was just talking to earlier, I do very much think that a lot of the environmental issues that we face now in cities, a lot of the problems we see, congestion, we see air quality issues, we see a lack of equity in city centres. So London, where I worked for 10 years of my life before I came to the Middle East in the late 90s, you can see that within the city centre, very few people actually live there anymore because they can't afford to live there anymore because they've been priced out of the city centre. And that's an equity issue. That's a fundamental environmental issue because what it does is it creates a situation where people who have to work in a city centre can't actually get to the city centre anymore. So we look at these issues and then we look at our designs and effectively embrace the issues in our design and try to resolve them through our design process. And that's really our DNA. And I think that says enough about us, does it? Yeah.
Hi everyone, good afternoon, Happy New Year. Matt Brown, my first time to Bahrain, so thank you very much for having me. Chief Sustainability at Expo City Dubai, and I also look after worker welfare, health and safety and accessibility. The hosting site for the World Expo 2020 and most recently for some, if not many of you, visiting the proud host, I should say, for COP28 at the back end of last year. So after probably a well-earned and well-needed rest for many of us on the site, obviously 2024 for us pivots away from certainly the large world mega events. We're still hosting events on site, but very much under the city guise now of trying to pivot towards the commercial tenants that we're looking to build upon, attracted to the city. Residents coming online and the design and completion of residents coming into the city over the years to come. So yeah, really looking forward to playing a part on the panel today.
Good afternoon. I'm Madhav Bhagwat. I'm founding partner of 2000 Watt Smart Cities Association. It's a Swiss association authorized by Swiss Federal Office of Energy to represent their philosophy. So basically we think that, urbanization is a source of climate change. And because of urbanization, all problems have started. So if we have to address climate change, the root is somewhere we need to address is how the urbanization needs to be re-looked at, how it needs to be reinvented, so that the climate change will not be problem, but it will be opportunity for everyone. And while doing so, 2000 Watt is an outcome of a research that has happened in ETH Zurich to find out what exactly climate change means to the people. Because people are the main stakeholders of the city. City is because of people. Now, if we have to give direct accountability of climate change to people, we need to get accounting of what is climate change per people. So that's where we calculated, scientists from ETH Zurich calculated what is the carbon capture consumption of Earth. And they simply divided 25 years ago with 8 billion population that is today. And the equation is 2000 watt. And based on that, the algorithms have been created which actually map and can showcase where we are today as far as climate neutrality is concerned. So it's a measurable, verifiable, adaptable, and flexible system which can ease and simplify the definition of climate change for every region. And that's what we try to address through our advocacy, training, coaching, capacity building, and hand-holding to the governments, to the institutions, those who are aspiring to reach net zero.
Thank you all for sharing your backgrounds, very rich and very interesting. And I think this question, I don't want to call it challenging, but somehow challenging, because you work on projects, you design cities, you work on different technologies, and what I'm going to ask each one of you now is to release all of the constraints when you are working on a project. And given your knowledge of what net zero is, what the target of the region is, how would you imagine the future city would look like? And you can feel free to go science fiction. So this is like a blank canvas in front of you, and if you were to be constraint-free, limitation-free, no need to think about any of your resources, how would you visualize having a future city? And please don't repeat the same point, so that puts pressure on the one who's answering. Okay. So I think I will start with Matt. And so the challenge is you don't repeat the same point. So each one will have to come up with a new idea.
I feel like I've got it a bit easier than the last person on the panel. Yeah, thanks for the question. Look, I think it is a challenging question, as you say, but it's also creative, I guess. It's also a cracking question. It's an important question, I think, as we look to the future. We've had to ask ourselves that question in looking at our decarbonisation strategy to net zero 2050 and work backwards from there. I think it's made all the more difficult that none of us have that amazing crystal ball that sees, much beyond next year, the next 3 years, possibly 2030. Beyond that, I think with the state of evolvement and changing technology and the rapid dynamism within parts of certainly the sustainability world does make it difficult to predict. So I thought about this a little bit more around the sort of themes that might expect to see, I guess, looking to 2050. We've looked quite a lot at how cities will likely evolve, and an Expo city being arguably a smaller community in comparison to the Londons, Riyadhs of this world. But I think that you look at the big elements of the carbon, energy. When we look at infrastructure, we've got a long way to go when it comes to looking at some of the low carbon materials that are going to need to be in place to get us to net zero. So the infrastructure side brings with it, I think, some of those challenges to look at a city in 2050 which has some serious mobility solutions in place, especially when we're making that a pertinent question really to this part of the world with the climatic cyclical conditions that we all live in. I think clearly technology comes into the picture. I'm not quite sure exactly, to your point around science fiction, what that looks like in 26 years' time, but I think that certainly the way we've looked to approach it at Expo City is sustainability is planting the use cases for technology to find the solution to as we move forward. I think with the question being about net zero, your mind naturally jumps to some of the environmental factors to look at that energy side, but to the point made already really that when we talk about cities, we can't look further than people being right at the centre. So it's all very well looking at a net zero city and looking at the environmental side. Let's imagine ensuring that that's economically viable, but if you've got a load of unhappy people walking around, that's not much of a city. So I think that comes with it, that balance to strike, I think in terms of the community engagement and getting that whole balance in check of environmental, social and economic right at the same time. So I've left that probably open a little bit. I've held a bit back for these guys to throw into.
Madav, I think, next.
That's an innovative question, I would say. And if you have to explore imagination, there are no boundaries. And if you have to imagine future cities, I'll first of all start with the energy part, because everybody is talking about energy today. And I feel that in future, energy is going to be for free and it's going to be renewable. So we don't have to bother much about energy at all. It's free. We may have systems that are driven by artificial intelligence and technology driven, where human doesn't need much of intervention for living daily life. We will have a very glorified picture where we have beautiful, healthier, prosperous living, which can be peaceful as well in future. But there are some, flip side of it. We need to think about future cities where the main human capital that we are thinking, what is going to be motive behind human capital? How the youth is going to think? What is going to be motivation behind with youth that they still strive to work every day? That needs to be thought of. But future is very much bright for the cities. And we need to put more pressure on building human capital as well as training next generation and youth. Because they are going to be the stakeholders who are going to use all these physical assets. And if they are not trained well to use physical assets, there is going to be the wastage of investment and asset creation that we are doing. So future cities are bright. They may have all the amenities that we think of today. It might be free of cost to everyone. We will have access to all the technologies. We will have at fingertips most of the knowledge base that, in olden days people used to go to library, but we have whole literature at fingertips today. So we will have all the amenities. We need to think on how we build our human capital and social system that needs to be addressed well, and that needs to be, that should have a cohesion to live peacefully.
Thank you. And
So I'll take a slightly different angle, looking at it from how a city is built and how it's operated. From a building perspective, the cities will be built hopefully with kind of different materials, which will be, less embodied carbon in terms of and how they're constructed as well, in terms of the way they're constructed. And on the other side, in terms of operating, obviously energy is so huge, so decentralizing of energy, decentralizing of water, which means you can do it locally, right? So ultimately a building will be its own power plant effectively, or water plant. So you have different, today you're beginning to have some solutions that will address that. So starting really embedding that into that. And kind of just completely turning it upside down, changing the mindset of how a city is built. I mean, Expo is an example of, a one way of how, of that, but the other cities obviously are coming aboard, but really just kind of rethinking just how it functions and how it functions, as you're saying, in terms of, to kind of really fit the, humans, in terms of how it works for us as well. Everything's closer, everything's decentralized, and everything obviously is looking at how you, build it in a more decarbonized way, yeah.
Okay, so this is a memory test as well, because I've got to remember what everyone else said and try and look clever, which is really hard for me anyway. So I'll take a completely different angle, and anyway, this is the angle that we always take anyway. I'm a designer, and so we've talked about social, we've talked about energy, and we've talked about materials. And all three of those are absolutely critical to how we achieve an environment which has social cohesion and effectively that people can wake up in the morning. And I like what Madhav, I think you said it actually, but the idea of happiness, the old Danish happiness score, the idea that people can get to work and feel good about life and feel good about their self-worth. So when I look at what we need to do in the future, I tend to look back because as a designer, we learn from our successes and our mistakes. And to be honest, a lot of what we do, people that get to my age, 80% of what we do is mistakes, 20% might be successful. But where we have been successful, and where I've been lucky enough to be successful in the past, is embracing the concept of the urban village. Now, the urban village, at Cityscape recently, I was talking about the same thing. And I tried to explain it by looking at, say, for example, Muharraq or something like that. That we're very lucky. We live in a region where where we actually have models of some of the most successful urban settlements that have ever been built. These are settlements that have been built for a long time. They embrace design criteria in terms of sustainable materials because they were locally sourced materials. They embrace passive cooling systems with the wind towers. There are small avenues which are cooled naturally because effectively they're small, they're shaded. You can walk everywhere. You can walk and get your local shawarma. You can walk everywhere. And this is how life was lived in the past. Now, there's actually no reason why life shouldn't be lived that way in the future. It was a good life. It was a happy life. And the ideal of the urban village concept is that effectively you're creating social equity. Everyone lives in the same space. You work in that space, you live in that space, you shop in that space. Now, this is actually something that's fairly easy to achieve on existing cities, and we have even done it. We've done it in London. We started it in the early 90s when I was working on the redevelopment of areas around Oxford Street, north of Oxford Street, where I started replanning sections of that area, bringing in different land uses, changes of use, retaining the structure, but changing the use, bringing in live work, bringing in amenities such as restaurants, F&B, and so on. And we actually created small pockets of live work. And some of those still exist now. Unfortunately, politics being what it is, the approach wasn't adopted wide scale and died off. But it has been embraced and is now called the 15-minute city concept, and now exists and it's embraced by places like Melbourne and so on. So the future city for me is one where you wake up in the morning, you're happy. You walk to work, Harbour Row, inshallah. You can go out, you can have a lunch within walking distance, you can come back to the office again, you can walk home, you can go back out in the evening and stay roughly in the same space. Your friends, your family, multi-generational living all take place in the same space. And to me, that's the idea of the future city. Less reliance on cars, private cars, non-sustainable modes of transport, and equity in terms of being able to move, and mobility in terms of transport solutions generally, and innovative materials. So that was a long answer, but...
A very, very interesting perspective, and I guess maybe some of the key takeaways, definitely things are going to change, and I think some of the changes are going to be more of a paradigm shift because, for example, when you're talking about having different material that is being used in construction, when we are talking about green mobility, when we are talking about how people are living their lives, these are not only changes that are happening as a result of certain specific measures, but there are lifestyle shifts. There are changes in the way, I was just having a conversation earlier about even the way we consume food. These are all behavioral aspects which are very much interrelated and integrated. Yeah, sure.
See, but if I just add, because what you're saying is making my brain work, which takes a while after lunch. But that's really critical because we were talking about this on the Cityscape panel, I think, a few weeks ago. And we've been driven into this corner by this reliance on the private car, for example, but also this reliance on just being able to get food delivered to your door and stuff like that. And it's become this instant, everything can just happen. And this paradigm shift you're talking about really responds to that. It's a new way of thinking. It's an old way of thinking,
it's
but
a new way of thinking. And the thing is, the challenge is, I think, which will take me to the next question, is because our lifestyle is so convenient, we, even as human beings, our mobility as people has reduced. And like they say, the problems of today were the solutions of yesterday, if I'm saying it correctly. But basically, for example, having food delivered, they were a problem at one point in time, okay? And now they became the solution. But the thing is, they are making you maybe less active because you're not going out as much.
I used to walk to school in the Highlands of Scotland in any weather, and it was about 5 miles. 5 miles there, 5 miles back. And that was normal for my generation. And, I know that I hate saying that because that sounds really, old guys saying this is the way it was. But the reality is, I think this idea of a paradigm shift and this idea of embracing how we live socially together, this change in the way we deal with each other. I
Yeah.
think these are where we need to go. This is the future city, really.
Exactly.
It's people, as the guys have already said.
So that leads me to my next question, which I will start with Medav. So basically, with all of these imagination and visualization we just did and the discussion we have, how do you think that if we are designing future cities, what can we do that will support and encourage the changing lifestyle? So, of course, part of net zero, part of sustainability is the social aspect. So how do you think that the designing, the changes in the future cities will be affecting or get affected by the lifestyle?
So designing part, when we come to city design, because urban planners have been taught somehow since over last, I would say, 5-6 decades, that cities need streets, cities will have cars. So these are the basic things that have been taught to urban planners. You have to move beyond that. Why we need cars? That is a fundamental question. Why can't we have, like he said, that we have 90% of our daily requirements within walking or cycling distance? Nobody likes to drive a car for half an hour or 1 hour every day to go to work and come back home. It's not fun to drive a car to go to work. But why we are driving still? Because of this urban planning mess that is today. So we have to think totally differently how urban planning needs to be worked out. We need to reimagine our cityscape. Those cities which are existing today need to be reimagined so that how decentralized functioning can happen within various micro cities within the mega city. Like city suburbs, can they be redesigned, reinvented for having 90% of daily requirements within walking distance? So it requires effort from public, private. Government is the key in reimagining it, because they are going to allow permissions. They are going to facilitate the new technologies, the new infrastructure amenities that may require. So permissions will lie with governments. So it again goes back to when we have to reimagine those cities or we have to reconstruct those. It is a partnership that will happen between government and private industry. And while developing those cities, we need to focus primarily on, like everybody has said, efficiency, then sufficiency. Sufficiency is very important, that we have to think in circular way. The problem today is that all the governments are thinking linearly. Every department has their goal. Similarly, in private industry, every department has their achievements and quarterly they have to perform on those pillars. So everybody is complying and looking best in their pillars. But nobody, breaks those silos. That is problem. So we have to think beyond that. And we have to create a cohesive structure which can create a cooperation between various departments, can create within the government as well as in private sector, so that we have more efficient structure of cities and planning as well as execution, and after execution at functioning. And after we have the efficiency, sufficiency, what is required as a third principle of 2000 watt is consistency. You have to keep on repeating it. And that will lead us to the final result.
Interesting. So Matt, I would like to hear your views, your thoughts on how are the future designs of cities.
Yeah, and I think, look, I think we can use ourselves as Expo as that small part of a larger city, right? In terms of the 15-minute planning principle is very much at the heart of where some of our design was. If we look back a few years, certainly to my early time at Expo, it was about delivering an exceptional Expo and leaving a meaningful legacy. But actually in that meaningful legacy was the design of the future city. Came first, and then it was deliver an Expo using that infrastructure which is now in place for a city. Yes, we've had other changes that we've had to look at now as part of the design, the addition of spaces for commercial tenants, the spaces coming on board, Expo Valley with a number of villas, high-rise residences of apartments. We've had to look at that design feature as part of many of the things mentioned already. I think it's down to some of the trends that we're seeing in lifestyle, but also trying to do that crystal ball kind of look to the future as to where we can give some of the social nudges within the operating side of things as well as the built environment. So we've had to look at, you know, the pedestrianisation of the entire city as it is today, and how much we look to keep of that versus the outer parts of our site. The smart parts of the city, the water usage. Expo City is now powered 100% on renewable energy, a recent announcement, which is fantastic news obviously for us on our net zero journey, but also because residents and the tenants of the future will be looking for that themselves. The tenants have their own ESG reporting requirements to satisfy. Residents themselves are now looking at their electricity and water bills and seeing, oh, how much of this is coming from renewable sources? So this was a huge part of where we wanted to go next as a city, looking at the trajectory of some of the cities in the future. It doesn't make that journey necessarily easy. We've also got, like every organisation, an economic pillar. We've got margins to keep, and trying to look at, okay, how can we look at an area like circularity and waste management to look at what's that going to look like in 5-10 years' time, without breaking the bank to get there, of what we need to put in the infrastructure side of things in place now while we're building these new residences. So there's a lot to think about. I think we've tried to sort of factor that in as that offering in terms of what we offer out to those different guest groups coming onto site. And for us, certainly the delivery of COP28, which is now in the rearview mirror, end of last year, allows us now to put that emphasis into this year and beyond, to again put people right at the centre as a human-centric city. You know, we're aspiring to a blueprint of sustainable living for the future, and a lot of that, to your point, comes back into the design as to what we try and put in place, down to the intricate detail. We're in conversations, you know, is it one car parking space or two? Are we ready for that conversation yet? Maybe not going down to one quite yet. We've got to sell these units. So I think that these are, you know, that type of conversation is one that will probably change in the future. Will certainly change if we get it right in terms of what we offer. So yeah, quite a wide spectrum, certainly.
A very interesting perspective. So we have efficiency, sufficiency, consistency, and we have the importance of the design stage, the importance of the cost that we are incorporating when we are designing. And this takes me to you, Mike. So it's the same question, but I wanted to add a little bit on top of that. So when you are, I think the point that was raised by Matt perhaps makes me think about, for example, like InfraCorp, you do have your existing projects. You have projects that are in the design phase. You have projects that are in the development phase. And I think when you are thinking about these, environmental, social aspects, you are thinking about green spaces. You are thinking about promoting recreation and promoting ecological balance. So how do you go about this? How do you implement these in your strategies or your design?
You read my mind, actually. It's fantastic. So we're really lucky. So we have a bunch of projects here in Bahrain which we've been reinventing for a long time, which we're like Harbour Road, which has now become a really nice live-work community. But I have a bunch of projects in North Africa, Morocco, Tangier, for example, where I effectively have empty land that I'm now master planning. So I'm starting from zero. And so the great thing about starting from zero is we really can look at the project from the point of view of how do I integrate green space into the project? How do I make it a walkable community? How do I make it an equitable community? How do I bring in biodiversity? So it's actually not very hard. And strangely enough, the first master plan that we did in Marrakesh, we embraced all of those principles. We really went for it. I really pushed the boat right out. We have urban farms. I have organic markets. We have linear green spaces throughout the entire 5,000 square meters of the project. 5,000 square meters, I think. And we've also embraced, as we were talking about earlier, the urban village concept. So we've got Medina-style housing designs, courtyard housing, walkability between all of the houses, and with very limited car access. So the great advantage of being in control of a master development is you can actually do that. Matt's point about the one car space per unit or two car spaces per unit, I'll be honest, this is one of the biggest problems I've had. I think the microphone is dying, or I'm just moving it around too much, but one of the biggest problems I've had over my career has been exactly that problem, because every project I've had to develop in London, Australia, Hong Kong, Singapore, Bahrain, Dubai, we've had to meet with a road transport authority of some sort who have basically said to me, we need a TIS, and within that TIS, we need you to guarantee this many cars per unit and so on. And that has actually, see what that does is it drives us to put more parking in, which means the cost of the building goes up, which means the cost to buy it goes up, but it also means that suddenly lots of cars are arriving at the project, which means the roads have to be wider, which, as Matt have pointed out, then means we're defined by the urban streetscape rather than walkability. The great thing about being in control of the full master plan is I don't need to do that. I can get away from all of that. I can basically say, look, we're going to force people to we're not forcing people, but we're engaging people. We're bringing people with us on a new narrative, which is, live and enjoy this space and walk in this space. And, the green community will be something that you will be willing to pay for, and people are honestly looking at it going, we want to come onto this project now, we want to be there. So I don't see it being a hard sell. I see people having aspirations for this kind of thing now, and when we can start from zero, it's easy. It's when you're starting from a dense built environment, it's much, much harder, because we have to some extent re-engineer the space.
So a very interesting discussion. Unfortunately, I was told we have limited time. So I think I'll ask Fethi the last question, and then we'll open for the audience. So if you can tell us about the built environment and the kind of what technologies can help with the built environment, and what are the key areas? Maybe you can share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, sure. So just to take a step back, we focus on this because on the built environment, in terms of helping decarbonize, that's really it. Because the built environment is the largest contributor to climate change. 40% of all CO2 emissions are from the built environment, 35% of all energy uses, and about 50% of all materials. So we really try and address the needs of the industry to help decarbonize. So when we look at from technology perspective, we look at that kind of from the lens of a building, everything from sourcing building materials. So for example, we invested in a company that produces carbon negative cement. It's exactly the same cement, Portland cement, a company called Brimstone, and it's got certification, and now they're going to start commercializing it. So that, sourcing materials. On the construction side, modular, 3D, the different processes which help you. That's kind of helping you reduce your embodied carbon in that. And then the next stage is kind of the operating of a building. So everything from, heating, cooling, battery storage, solar, EV charging, and really kind of making kind of, operating a building more efficient, looking all sorts of technologies to address that. And then finally, kind of the end of life of a building. How do you get rid of a building in a more sustainable way? Recycling of materials, of solar, of battery, of all these things. So really looking at the whole, and that is it's a huge opportunity today. I mean, in the US, there's been a couple of reports that come out say that, to bring all buildings in the US to kind of carbon neutral net zero is you need like $19 trillion, right? In the Middleeast, PwC came out with a report recently. I think for COP, they said it's a $2 trillion opportunity. And it's driven by a whole bunch of things, but essentially the need is to kind of bring down that, and it's part of designing new cities and what have you. That's part of a driver, but I think it's important to kind of embed that in, just as the likes of NEOM are looking at that, for example.
Thank you very much, and I think we'll just open the floor for questions from the audience, and you can also feel free to share your imagination about the future cities. I was hoping we will think about homes for aliens, but nobody brought that up. So, flying cars, things like that, but nobody mentioned that. So if you feel you have any ideas, any thoughts, any questions.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for this lively session. My name is Naeem Al-Qasir, and I am Bahraini and have worked 26 years in World Health Organization. Health started learning health, as what you heard just now, that we need to talk about where we live and how we live and the ecosystem, whether it's us as human beings or the greeneries or the animals around us or the environment. When I look at what's the future, I think the first time I heard engagement of the people was today, since yesterday. We heard about private-public partnerships, but engaging people is the key. And this immediate, my question is, whether it's the technology getting towards zero carbon or change our behaviors, because for the new modern era, we were told that the best happy life is to have these big compounds in a certain style, huge cars, transportation, flying, talking about flying because it's another carbon emission in the world, but how can we change the behavior of us who are current, learning from the past? I always give the example of historically, if I go to Luxor, which is a whole city of a museum, this is in Egypt, and you see how they respected life, any living, not only human being, in terms of air, earth, breathing, movements of the flow of the water, oceans, we didn't talk much about oceans. So my question, engagement, but at the same time, changing the behavior of us who are current, but future generation. Our future generation now already, they have been educated to be in a certain communities. And that's one of the things we're talking about for sustainability. I come, and I want to link this, and maybe I can hear answer. I come from a country that age of 7, we were taught about health and healthy environment. And now we are talking about COP. This is very, very, I color my hair always, I say. But it shows that country had a vision, and this is Bahrain, of where we should look for future and our aspiration. As a child, I was thinking, we don't need all these cars, we need the greeneries. And I lived in a greenery. Today, if you visit my neighborhood, you think it was always a desert. It was full of water, full of greens, change. So that's the change of the behavior, engagement, and what can we do for the young generations, where many of them here, and the younger ones, to be really looking, answering your question. Let's do it.
Does this work? Yeah, okay. I think you've answered the question. I remember Bahrain when I remember, I've been here for 25 years, so I remember when we had Green Oasis. I remember Bahrain when it was quite a different country. It's changed. I don't want to comment on where we are now, but your point is extremely well made. How do we engage people to and this is what Zeba was saying as well. How do we bring people along on this journey? How do we engage them and then bring them on the journey? I don't think I can give you an answer to that. The reason I like to talk about the urban village concept is the same reason I think you asked the question, and that is because the village concept is one where children are raised by the village. The village creates a code of morality. It creates a code of engagement. Everybody within a village participates. It's a social contract, effectively. If you're part of the village, you're part of a social contract, which means that you're then part of a social good. And there's shared welfare, there's shared amenity. You know your neighbor. These are things that in the past existed, now not so much. All I can say is I think they're the things that are critical to the success of the human species. If we want to still be here in 25 years, these fundamentals, I think Madhav very much spoke about this as well. Where the city of the future has to be is it has to be a city where we do still embrace that social contract, because the social contract will solve the environmental crisis, because we will all buy into it then. We will understand that we're all part of the problem, but we all have to be part of the solution as well.
I can add to your question. So basically, I think what His Excellency mentioned, the Minister, in his opening remark about his daughter and how she's so environmentally conscious, which is very promising. And this is something we are seeing it in the new generation, which they are the ones who would be living with the world that is in the situation it is. So if I would think about how you can change the behavior, I think it's the carrot and stick analogy, if I would put it this way. So on one side, you let them think about the incentive. And on the other side, the flip side is, what if they didn't? So for example, when you are charging people for plastic bags, it's a minimal charge, but it hurts. So people are thinking twice, do I really want to pay these small filses for the plastic bags? But it is encouraging a change in behavior. The next time, maybe they forget, but the time after, they will remember to bring in their own bags. So that's one way of thinking about it. And I think maybe our role, or our generation, what we can think of is, how is the next generation learning how they are behaving and how they are living their lives? And one way to think about it is, they are learning by seeing what the others are doing. So if we are practicing or changing or modifying our behaviors, our practices, it doesn't have to be dramatic, but one step at a time. Last night I was watching TikTok. So there was this young girl, and she was actually talking about how shocked she was that over the past 2 years, she bought so much makeup. And she was saying, like, I really don't need all of this makeup. Like, seriously, I'm not going to use 10, 7, 8 of the same product. But the reason I'm buying it is because there are these influencers who are making me feel I need it. It's not a matter of wanting it, it's a matter of needing it. And I think becoming aware of our consumerism behavior is a key driver to actually becoming aware of how are we. It's not only a matter of saving money, but how are you really consuming? So these are all changes that, gradually over time, and I think more and more consciousness is being created about this. I think it should eventually help with this. So we can take, there was another question.
If I just have to add
yeah.
answer that how to change the behavior of next generation is primarily lying with coaching and capacity building. How we build the capacities to even coach the kids also, and how we lead them by example. So for example, when 2000 watt idea came into picture, first we had to demonstrate as a real estate development company that how carbon neutral town can exist in Switzerland, having all the amenities and best lifestyle in the world, still how inside city of Zurich, how carbon neutral living can be delivered. So that's where we demonstrated Green City Zurich project inside city of Zurich, which is first certified carbon neutral 2000 watt project. If you go and ask people there, they will say we are much happier here. We have everything in walking distance. We are rather saving on our operational cost. We are enjoying our life, although we are paying premium to buy the property here. And with that example, now there are over 50 such towns in Switzerland and 250 the energy cities by now. So it's leading by example. People will experience and then they will copy paste. People is a herd mentality, they will copy paste. But for that, we have to put the example with them. We have to create such neighborhoods which can demonstrate such life, and then aspirations can start building.
Okay, so one last question. We have a question over there.
Hello. I'm Mohammed Matar from Bank ABC. I heard with interest the panel speak about future cities and about how the cities have become not affordable for people to work, and they talked about examples where we want to do. You mentioned Muharraq, where you walk to work and then walk to the supermarket, and my fellow participant here mentioned how Bahrain has changed, and this is obvious with the changing requirements and the countries being more densely populated. Where we were having our workshop yesterday, I might not be factually correct, but it probably was sea before it was filled with land. So my question is, as I hear this with interest, is it feasible to apply these ideas in densely populated countries or cities like Bahrain, which is a tiny place, or like London? I mean, Tangier I can understand, but is it feasible, or is the solution maybe what is happening, or what I thought was happening, where people don't need to drive to work anymore, and there's a lot more focus on working from home in London? From the people I hear, a lot of people are living far away from the city and doing their work from, from the village that you mentioned. So.
I'm live. It is feasible. So you just have to revisit the concept. So the old urban village concept was a lateral space concept. So it was spread out. The new urban village concept is a vertical concept. So effectively, what you're now starting to look at is vertical multi-generational living. Now, there are successful projects already in London. There's a very successful one in Greenwich, which has received loads and loads of awards. Multi-generational living as a concept is what it says on the tin. Everybody, the whole community lives together, young and old, including pensioners and that type of thing. So it's fully integrated. The project is fully amenitized. It has all of your amenities, including F&B, retail, and everything else within the project. It's effectively vertical. And the great thing about that project is it's also a modular construction project. And the even greater thing is we're looking at doing exactly that in Al Ain, inshallah, in the next 24 months. So this type of concept is possible. And I really do think that the future, unfortunately, because as you say, of density, we're forced upwards. We can't continue to do Muharraqs in the very beautiful way they were originally conceived. So now we have to effectively do the same thing, going vertically.
So thank you very much. We can have your answer with the concluding remarks.
Yeah, I'll keep it short. Just to add, I think, to what was just said. I think absolutely, not just is it feasible, is it the way we need to go in certain areas? And I think the contextual part to the Middle East, without wishing a comment against my homeland from years gone by in the UK, I think here's the opportunity here to really, whereas the constraints that come with a London or a Paris or a northern European city, let's say, and I'm not just saying this because half of our business model for the future is about trying to create that, somewhere you can live, work out, walk your dog, all within that 15-minute city is absolutely feasible. Some of it, as we said, comes down to that design side before, but some of it is, I think, the social part weighing up against some of that environmental necessity with some of those net zero targets that need to be attained. And I think there's already examples out there. You look at the likes of Sustainable City and some of where the social concepts come within Dubai. There's another one being built down in Abu Dhabi in the UAE. So I think that is absolutely a trajectory that's there. It's just we all need to collaboratively now get on that trajectory to go and reap the benefits from it.
And your concluding remark? So just any final thoughts?
Any final thoughts? Yeah, look, I think I just want to sort of final remarks come back to the lady's question. I think that a lot of this that we didn't necessarily talk about with your first question is the bedrock of education and awareness. I think even though we're talking about cities, we're talking about people, the question came in about certainly what, we have been educated before. We have a climate change problem, but we also have an education problem. We have a huge population out there who don't understand the problem, let alone the solutions that can be put in place. Therefore, what can we do about that? And I think that comes to some of the high agenda points raised in the likes of COP28, but it's what we can all do. Urban Farm was raised earlier as an example. We brought to life an urban farm in Expo, and it quite surprised a few of us, not for the environmental side, but for the social side and the education side and the awareness side, that people didn't even know that what we were trying to put in place with sustainable farming was contributing to lowering carbon emissions. I didn't know that actually 6 months, 8 months before we put it in place. So I use that as a small example, but I think to conclude, to reach what we need to reach with the net zero targets for the likes of cities, yes, it's about talking about energy. Yes, it's about power consumption. It's about 2050 net zero. But it's also about keeping balance to both, the economic pillar to self-sustain into the future and also the social side. They have to come in equal proportions if that city is going to be truly sustainable, I think, into the long term.
Thank you. Thanks, Matt. So, Fathi, your final thoughts?
Hello? Yeah, I agree completely. One other point, by the way, sorry, coming back to that point. I mean, there's also areas where they do urban regeneration, right? Where parts of towns, whether it's in London or other cities, where either the whole district is really old and dilapidated, it's not working or it's not working for people in terms of how people work and live. So districts are getting regenerated, as it were, and the opportunity now is actually to do it in the way that we've been discussing today. That's a huge opportunity. So within big cities, definitely there's an opportunity to do that.
I've spoken too much.
So if you have to conclude, like for future cities, then I would say there is no option with a word than to have urbanization and to live in cities. Because if we talk about development, everybody aspires to be developed, then the future is cities and urbanization. And that has to encompass all the three pillars of sustainability, that we are not too much on one of the pillars. If we take social, economy and ecology, then we have to put same weightage on all the three pillars, then only tripod can stand. We cannot say only social is important, then economy is not so important, because what we observed regularly, that ESG standard typically forgets about economy. So we have to have a sustainable economic solution also. Projects have to be bankable to address. So the future cities are those who are economically viable, where people find opportunities and they feel happier and healthier and safe life.
So Mike, less than a minute.
Really, we're running out of time and I talk way too much. I'd just say all of the above. I love the question, it was fantastic, and I think it was a very useful question about what we can do in terms of whether it's feasible. Look, we can solve the problem. It's partly a social problem, it's partly an economic problem. Education is one of the solutions. And I think we just need to create the narrative and then bring people along with us on that narrative.
Thank you so much, and I highly appreciate your participation and very insightful ideas. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ms. Ziba and all our panelists. So now we've reached on the mic. So now we're going to talk about building resilient and energy efficient supply chains. So this session will see operations experts address the impact of climate change and the road to net zero on the development and maintenance of robust and resilient supply chains. As climate change comes to impact more and more businesses around the world, leaders must have strategies in place to protect and secure their supply chains while taking action to reduce emissions and move their businesses towards carbon neutrality. Companies must also face and manage pressures associated with identifying carbon flashpoints in their supply chains and ensuring these emissions are also addressed as part of their Scope 3 reductions. Experts will discuss how to tackle these critical issues. Specifically, they will provide insights into the strategies and tactics being used by market-leading businesses in the region and globally, and the needed innovation, technologies, and collaborations to decarbonize supply chains. We have, of course, our moderator, Mr. Kalyan Krishna Subramanian, Head of Market KPMG, and we'd like to invite our speakers. Of course, Mr. Ali Rizfi, Head of Program Management, Middle East Operations, Lucid Motors, will be joining us virtually. I'd like to invite Mr. John Robson, CEO of Basrek, Julie Steele, Global Sustainability Manager, West Point Home, and Mr. Yusuf Al-Arayat, General Manager, Mueller, Middle East.
Ladies and gentlemen, before we can start, if people at the back, I know you're sitting at the back so that you can do what you're doing, but if you want to do it more comfortably, we have a lot of comfy chairs up front. So feel free to join us up front. Thank you once again to the Sustainability Forum Middle East for the 2024 Annual Summit. We do have one of our delegates joining us online, so it would be interesting to actually see another person, extremely large screen. There we go. Hey, welcome. Is over there? Excellent. So, I wanted to say thank you to Matt, but I'll catch him later outside, because one thing he mentioned about the Expo City and how successful COP was, the one impact he left out was the indirect impact in terms of how I managed to get my entire year's worth of steps done in a week. The second indirect impact was, I think they were also the cause of the surge in sales for sneakers on day 2, for the number of people who walked across the entire city who decided they needed new shoes. But I think, there we go, in agreement. The topic we've had, and today has been a whirlwind, right, from the start. We talked about PPPs, we looked at climate finance, we looked at sustainable cities. It's a flurry of topics. Somehow, for me, in the back of my mind, that's still the what part of we need to achieve as business leaders, as leaders representing government sectors. Now, we all know that the way and the pace at which the marketplace is changing is quite significant. And even if it's not regulations from a national standpoint, it's the cross-border regulations that are now starting to apply pressure on top of how we do things from an operational standpoint. And before we can even jump into the questions, what I would really like to do is get a quick kind of thought process from the panelists, and once he's back, is trying to instill sustainability within the supply chain. Is it a risk? Is it an opportunity, or both?
Hi, thanks everybody. Yeah, I think that's quite an interesting question, because I think it covers both aspects. Yes, it definitely can be a risk to a business, because obviously you've got to be very selective with some of the clients that you need to use and the products that you need to use in your business. But it's also an opportunity as well, because I think it gives us the opportunity to challenge our suppliers and the companies that we deal with. And I think as companies and as businesses, we need to be choosy with the people that we want to engage with. So I think it gives us an opportunity to challenge our clients and our customers, and making sure, let's say we're all on this, because we work in the shipbuilding industry, so we're on this journey together, we're on this journey on this green ship, let's call it. So are we engaged and are we fully aligned with the people that we want to deal with? So we have to be choosy with the suppliers and the people that we work with as clients. And if they're not on the same boat or the same journey as us, then maybe we have to rethink that.
I think in your case the phrase is perfect, right?
Yeah.
Are they on the same boat?
The same boat, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. So definitely it's both. But I mean, the risk is always there. It's the risk of doing business. But I think the opportunities here outweigh the risk, just because there's a lot of untapped potential. And the last time this was tested was during COVID. Those with sustainably robust supply chains are here today. Those without were not able to withstand the challenges that were faced.
Good evening, good afternoon. My name is Julie Seal. I'm the Sustainability Manager and Environmental Director for West Point Home, which is a global textile company, and we have manufacturing facilities in Florida, but our main plant is right here in Bahrain. And I got my first opportunity to visit this week, and what they are doing from a Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. And I'll get to Scope 3 and supply chain in a minute, but I have to talk about Scope 3s, Scope 1s and 2s. What that plan is doing is tremendous. They have taken energy recovery systems and implemented them throughout the entire plant. They have an innovative use of boiler flue gases to neutralize chemical waste process in the plant. They are using ozone to treat their wastewater, which is one of the few textile plants doing it. As you may know, textile waste is responsible for about 20% of the wastewater in the world. So their projects that they're doing in-house have really accelerated our Scope 1 and Scope 2 journey. We also, as a company, have a subset of our products that are produced by outside suppliers. So because of the nature of textiles, that they have human contact when they're finished, like towels and sheets, the quality of our suppliers becomes imperative. And the textile industry is really kind of ahead of this supply chain curve because of the health implications of what we make. We have to have suppliers that are quality, that use environmentally compliant techniques, that use socially compliant techniques. So this has been built into our company for years. I say all that to say we have stopped short of setting a net zero goal because we are in the process of implementing several pathways to gather the right data from our suppliers on Scope 3. And the reason I have not set a net zero ahead of that, or as a company we have not set a net zero ahead of that, is I think it would create a gap between our carbon reduction goals and what we can actually do if I ignore Scope 3. So that's what we're in the process of right now, is putting those pathways into place to engage our supplier network. And not all suppliers are created equal. Some will be able to tell you some data, some will be able to say what. So we've got to be able to bridge that gap with them.
That's great. Do we have Ali or maybe not?
Hi.
There we are.
Can you guys hear me? Yeah. Hi. So I think just to respond to your question, I think it's definitely both risk and opportunity. I think the risk is if we're not ready because we don't know what's the next crisis, right? Whether it's going to be another war or another pandemic. And so if we don't have sustainable supply chains ready and it'll end up being something we don't foresee, and whether you're able to take advantage of the scenario or not.
Thank you. So it's good that all of you have that same view in terms of it being both an opportunity and a risk standpoint. However, where is this being driven from? Are leaders within your organizations, is the board aware of this as an opportunity and a risk? Is the dialogue happening at that board level, at the senior executive level? Where's this being driven from as an organization?
Yes, it's working. This is definitely at the top of our executive chain. The supply chain issues became economic issues for everybody. And so this conversation about how we drive alternate pathways for transportation, how we regionalize finished goods storage, things like that, this is at the top of the level because it has such an economic impact. And the way we pivoted during COVID to address these issues, our leadership has embraced and probably will remain for the rest of our business model.
So it's been changing a lot. So previously, ESG was more of a CSR initiative. However, right now it's completely different. The change really started for us, at least, all the way from our investors and the end users. Copper is 100% recyclable, but we need to produce it in a sustainable way. And so you've got regulations such as the Carbon Boundary Adjustment Mechanism in Europe, and recently the Inflation Reduction Act in the US as well. And obviously you have the ESG Scope 3 requirements that were launched. So it's coming at us from everywhere. And the best time to be ready was yesterday. So if we haven't started, we should start today.
Perfect. John?
Yeah, I think if we look at the whole supply chain in general, that 75% of most businesses' environmental impact actually comes from the end-to-end supply chain, right? So, we have to look at that holistically as a business, and, we've definitely got, in our company, we've definitely got the mandate from the board to make sure that, we are following the guidelines, and that is an important part of our business going forward as well. But it also creates other opportunities for us as a business, and because we have diversification within inside our business, does that also lead to other opportunities for us with acquisitions and so that we get engaged in the actual green footprint process in terms of technology? So it opens up many doors, but we've definitely got a strong focus on that going forward, and I think we have to.
Fantastic. Ali, if I can ask you to chip in.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, for us, definitely it's ingrained into our mission, our vision, and it's those conversations are happening at almost every level of our organization. One of our founding principles was that to create one of the most efficient vehicles in the world, and you know, we're doing that today. I mean, it's not just about creating an electric vehicle, but how do we rank in terms of efficiency even within the range of electric vehicles? And right now, you know, everything that we're doing on a technology standpoint is around that.
Excellent. I'm going to keep you on screen so I can get you to chip in first in this round.
Sure.
Julie, you mentioned Scope 3. Yusuf, you brought into play that this was once formerly known as CSR and how this kind of fit in. Now, what's the challenge when it comes to actually implementing a successful, sustainable supply chain process? Is it data? Is it, you know, technology, the processes behind it? Or is it the stakeholders you have to actually engage and bring into play? Ali?
Sure. I think part of it is scale. Because, you know, as you're the first one in, the scale isn't quite there yet, which makes things expensive. We're actually one of the most vertically integrated automotive OEMs out there because a lot of our technology we had to build from scratch in-house. That's what gives us our added range. It wasn't something that we could you know, buy off the shelf or work with partners on because it gave us more control to do it in-house. Obviously, that makes things more expensive for us. But as we grow and scale, I think that will change. Also, it's about finding the right partners. I mean, even with cost aside, sometimes it's you're not able to do everything in-house, and then you need partners that will believe in you, in the cause, and the long-term vision.
Perfect. Yusuf?
Yeah, so it's all of the points. These are all challenges, but for us, it's mainly the stakeholders. Is the stakeholder willing to pay a premium for a product that was made in a more sustainable manner? So it's not as much of a challenge, I would say, in the US and in Europe, because there are regulations in place that make it a level playing field for everyone supplying to those regions. However, here in the Middle East, I think there's a lot of room for improvement, things that we could do, because obviously the consumer would go for a less expensive product, but then if you have the regulations in place, then all of a sudden we're all incentivized to take that route.
Perfect. Thank you. Julie?
I think the challenges really revolve around communication and collaboration in an otherwise competitive world. And how do we work on these issues as a supply chain as a whole to a common outcome? And so it really requires a certain level of a different type of approach. Scope 1 and Scope 2, very prescribed. A lot of examples of projects out there. Scope 3, wide open space. Never know what's going to come back out of your investment in Scope 3s. So what we've done is taken a three-pronged approach, and we're in the process of implementing this. The first one was born out of our Blackburn, England office, and they are having relatively regular meetings with our buyers, our regulators, our local regulators, to make sure we have a holistic understanding of what's needed from the supply chain. We don't want to be myopic in our views of that. So that's one approach. The second approach is we're working on developing a supplier outreach online form, for lack of a better word. And what this will do is allow companies that may not report under any specific carbon model or anything to tell us their narrative and say, give them the opportunity to tell us, oh, we're working on this project. And while they may not have the resources to calculate what that means to the life cycle analysis of that products, we could help them with that. And the third part is that one-on-one outreach to your suppliers to make sure that everybody's speaking the same language, understands our goals, and to really squeeze that life cycle analysis so that we have the best carbon reduction we can for our given product. Because at the end of the day, we're selling to customers that do have net zero goals. And they're not going to accomplish it. They're going to look at their suppliers and say, y'all accomplish it. So how do we do that? So we're not just selling a high quality sheet, linen, towel, whatever. We're selling them a carbon reduction as built into the product.
That's fantastic. John?
Yeah, I think if we, obviously, just going back to your question there, I think it covers, we need to cover everything that's on there. But there is so much more as well, because, if we look at scope 3, for example, there's so many ways that we can save, and all of that comes from diligent planning. Planning is the key to everything in life. So, if we have these strong relationships with our suppliers, and let's look at them further than just being suppliers, let's look at them as being the partners. If we have that constant engagement with them, and we set them KPIs for these, for these companies that we deal with, we're keeping them informed of what's happening in our business, then we can reduce, obviously, transportation costs and everything else that's included in that. So, to give I suppose, an example, instead of reactive procurement, we have a rush that comes in and we want to procure something, it's got to come in via an aircraft. If we're more informed with our clients, we have the better relationship with our clients, the end users, and then from there we can convey that message through to our partners, which are the supply companies. Then we're better informed. So through that planning process and making sure there's transparency right across the board, we're able to get a better result at the end of the day, which will reduce in transportation and logistics and everything else that goes around it. So it's that full cycle, making sure that we're open, we're transparent, and I suppose it all leads back to knowing your customer and knowing your client. If you've got a better relationship with them, you're organised before they come in. That, if I use the ship as an example, we know in advance what they're going to require, what they're going to need. So when they come in, everything's there, everything's been organised. So I think everything goes back to planning. So I think that's the key fundamental criteria.
So with what you were explaining in terms of, yes, the planning part, but then there's also, you need to put the right processes in place, the right technology in place, making sure that you can manage and maintain that transparency across the suppliers, the stakeholders involved, even in that pipeline. Clearly, there's a cost factor to all of this, right? And where does it sit from a cost standpoint? Is it quite high to implement a sustainable supply chain from a cost standpoint? And if so, is that cost higher than the cost of inaction?
Interesting question. Well, I think a lot of that goes to contingency. You've got to make sure that you've got that constant supply. So it's being able to, it's a bit of everything really. We've got to be sure that, that we're warned or pre-planned in advance, and then to make sure we've got a robust plan around that. And some of that is automated systems and processes. We've got to make sure that the processes are in place so we can meet upon our deliverables for the client. So there's many factors that we can determine by the whole planning process. So, and that can be an automated process, it can be a digital process, but it can also be a transparency through communication. So communication is obviously very key to this as well.
Okay. Julie?
This question to me boils down to a simple statement. If we can't ship it, we can't sell it. So there is no cost that is too expensive not to invest in your global supply chain.
Fantastic. Yusuf?
Yeah. So I agree with my peers here. So Mueller is over 100 years old, and when they set up in the Middle East at around 2016, we were the first and currently also the only copper tube mill in the region, which is a very niche industry. And so this was one of the things that were brought up at a very early stage that we need to develop local suppliers. And they went to the extremes of investing in local businesses, giving them some subsidies to help them buy equipment that would help us. And it really paid off during COVID. Now, obviously, you can't even associate a cost with disruption because if you can't ship it, you can't sell it. But for us, a stoppage could be worth $100, like any disruption could be worth $100 a day. And so there's, whatever the cost is, you need to have a really robust supply chain. You can't play around with that.
Ali, if I can get your thoughts on this.
Sure. Of course, contingency and redundancy always do have associated additional costs. But I mean, in terms of automotive, I think we were lucky in a way that during the pandemic, the trouble of not having that was clearly highlighted with all the OEMs and the shortage of vehicles. And we still have OEMs that are recovering and their supply chains are still recovering. So it makes the argument easier, at least in our industry, but definitely the opportunity is greater than the cost.
Thank you. So I'm hearing that this is also now an opportunity to be able to take a look at or relook at your supply chain because there's bound to be some optimization opportunity, for lack of a better phrase. But at the same time, there's also some clear opportunities out there that you can kind of leverage quite significantly. It would be really useful, and if I can be cheeky enough to kind of ask you guys to kind of have a think back into your own operations, and if you can share maybe one clear kind of example. You don't have to give us specifics, obviously we understand there's certain confidentiality around it, but if you can share with us an example where there was a clear opportunity that was leveraged, but also if there was a case where there was an incident or there was an issue where you kind of saw that risk manifest itself. Julie, if I could start with you.
I've been with West Point Home for about 2.5 years now, and I understand years ago they had implemented compression on a lot of the home textiles that they used, and maybe the textiles didn't rebound once they were taken out the package, and they abandoned a lot of those compression issues. But during the pandemic, shipping costs were so high, we took a look at it again and realized that compression was appropriate for certain products. So we worked with at least one of our suppliers, maybe even more, to implement that process for the right kind of product. Save space on the boat, save space on everywhere. As an auxiliary project to this, we were also able to take a look at our plastic packaging, and what the Bahrain staff came up with was they used the leftover fabric scraps to create self-fabric bags in lieu of plastic packaging. So these two projects correlated to really some really good ideas, but it involved going over an old idea and implementing correctly with the lessons we learned, and then implementing waste reduction techniques. And again, that's not necessarily related to our supply chain, but it certainly didn't hurt to go away from plastic packaging on certain products.
Thank you. Yusuf.
Julie, I'm glad you mentioned scrap. So, I talked earlier about developing local suppliers, but we can't develop local mines. We don't have any mines here. So we imported 100% of our raw material, copper, mainly from Africa. But then during COVID, we had to rethink that. And obviously we looked at scrap. So we approached the Supreme Council for Environment, and there's about $40 million worth of copper scrap that ended up either in landfills or exported to other countries on an annual basis. So obviously working with them and with a little bit of investment, we were able to become licensed as the first copper recycler in Bahrain. And obviously right now we have about 30% of our annual copper consumption secured locally. And this is just Bahrain. And so the plan is to expand and go to the rest of the GCC countries and hopefully reach somewhere about 90% recycled copper by 2026.
That's impressive. So there's potential for the next COP bar to come by. So
No, I think with us, because we in our organisation we use a lot of specialty alloys and a lot of materials. So obviously when COVID hit, there was a reduction in being able to get materials from our current supply chain. So it's given us the opportunity now to look outside of that, to be able to plan for the future and make sure that we've got obviously your plan A, but also your plan B and your plan C in terms of other areas or other countries that we can bring in our materials. And it's probably given us the opportunity as well to look at more competitive pricing, because we've cast the net a little bit further. And it gives us the opportunity as well to be able to develop other relationships in other countries. So it's from a negative, I suppose, it's created a positive in terms of us widening our scope in terms of the availability of material from different locations around the world. But it's also enabled us to be more competitive as well, because we've got that competitive advantage coming through potential other supplies from different locations. So yeah, I think there's, out of so many negatives that happened there's a lot of positives that came from it. And obviously the building of the new relationships and making sure that we rethink about our business and make sure in terms of contingency, we've got the plan A, the plan B and plan C, where we'd always gone on a one-dimensional sort of trip in our procurement. So it's opened up some new channels for us, I think.
That's fantastic. Ali?
Yeah, so, while we're still a fairly young OEM, this past year, we just started our second factory in the kingdom here. Excuse me, where we're going to be building vehicles. We actually are building vehicles, we're looking at localizing our supply chain over here. The impetus behind some of that was that we're closer to our customers. We're developing a supply chain from scratch, which is obviously comes with its risks, and questions why we're building it from scratch. But that really helps us manage some of that risk that we saw, come up during the pandemic. So, we continue to have our factory in Arizona, which is right now our primary factory, but building that here, in that whole supply chain here in the kingdom has been quite interesting. I mean, while we were the first, there are two other OEMs that are now announced that they'll be, building vehicles here along with us. Again, that helps bring in international suppliers and develop a whole ecosystem here locally, that, if ever we run into any issues, we have a local supply base, and we'll be continuing to build vehicles in Kingdom, in the region. And I think that the benefit is, not just for the Kingdom, but for the whole region. I mean, there'll be about, any particular OEM typically has, I would say, between 250 to 350 suppliers providing all kinds of different parts for them. So imagine, as we increase the number of OEMs here, the immense opportunity for the whole region.
If you need a guy who supplies copper, I know a guy. Given that you've all started this journey a while back, right? In terms of, you've clearly been seeing the benefits almost from the point of the pandemic and how it's been changing. If you had the opportunity, because always hindsight is the biggest, foresight is the biggest gift of things, but it comes from hindsight, right? So if you could go back 3 years and change something within that planning of your supply chain, what would you change?
I think probably for us it's making sure that we have better communication with our suppliers, making sure that we had strong, robust procedures internally on how we do the due diligence around our suppliers in terms of their capabilities. Many companies, you know, they can deal with a company on the internet now, they don't know who they're dealing with, but maybe it would have been, in hindsight, better to have more understanding of their capabilities, and that could only come from moving away from having transactional relationships to partnership relationships, so knowing more about their capabilities, them knowing more about our business, and possibly us sharing more about our journey with our clients, so being able to have that transparency across the board where they know about our clients and their expectations, also our expectations, but us having some expectations on them to be able to ensure that they have the right kind of products available to us. And that can only come from having a strong relationship. So, you know, I see many of our clients and suppliers, they all have to be a partner. If they're not a partner in this, if they're not on that journey with you and part of your everyday business life, then really we can't expect too much from them, can we? So it's about having expectations on ourselves, our clients, the people that we deal with, but making sure that transparency is running right through the whole process.
Julie?
Like I said, I've been with West Point Home for about 2.5 years, so I don't have a really long viewpoint on their particular journey just from where I've started. One thing I would say from a supplier chain standpoint, as well as Scope 1s and Scope 2s, is having the framework for the metric gathering and identifying what in our supply chain is material to our journey. We're working on that actively, but having started that process sooner, really laying a framework up front. A lot of the data we may have, but it may not be where we need it to be or organized or however you want to say it. So just really starting that data gathering process earlier on.
Yeah, so if there was one thing is, I would tell myself it's not a square box, square solution. And John, you mentioned about building partnerships with our suppliers, and that it's not only just transaction. And I agree with you, a lot of the times whenever we face an issue, it's that relationships that we've built with our suppliers that help us overcome them. And the same thing applies to our customers. Having more transparency, as you said, I completely agree with that. So that's the one thing that I would have changed.
Fantastic. Ali?
I think there's two things for me. One, in terms of our partnerships, looking at partners that really bring in long-term thinking and are more aware of their capability. I think that was mentioned before, and it's the same for us. And then the other thing would be better communication. I think better communication with our partners, better communication with our customers, our value proposition and what we're bringing.
Brilliant, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you have your own share of supply chain success stories and in some cases even horror stories. But would you care for any questions that you would like to answer? Oh, one hand went up straight away. Arun. And we got all three hands in one corner.
I'm going to talk about a horror story. So we are consulting firms associated with a number of financial institutions, and we received a long questionnaire to fill. I'm sure that we are preparing for maybe the S3. But my question is, why do we need such a long questionnaire? Should we be focusing on certain key elements in each part? Because maybe that will solve 80% of our problems. Are we focusing on too much details and getting lost in the details? Because some of these questions, it requires judgment, and how it is going to be perceived by the person reading it might be different. So can we make this a shorter questionnaire, and can we focus on maybe 4 or 5 key areas when we reach out to our suppliers, so we get at least start getting better reports? Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. Often the questionnaire is really that long because some other consultant wrote it. But yeah, sorry. Any thoughts in terms of your supplier conduct, your supplier questionnaires that you reach out to them with?
Yeah, so whenever you build a questionnaire like this one, it's not, first of all, it's not one size fits all, and you have to keep on refining it. So let's say you started off with a very long questionnaire, and then you see the quality of the responses that you get. What are the things that you really care about? And then you start refining it. I do agree, short, concise questionnaires are always best, but it's not something that you could do from version number 1. Organizations take years and years and years to develop something like that.
I think to the point of having partners and not just suppliers, that is really what we try to get to if we send out a vendor application. And you know, it's not just the financials of a company or the social compliant aspects or their environmental footprint, it's all of that. And so, you know, we continually, to Yusuf's point, work on that application. We're working on it now again. We are trying to make it a more user-friendly process. But we want partners that are going to be with us for a long time and have the same values. So that's part of the reason that questionnaire really tends to drift in length.
Yeah, I think with the questionnaires that you're talking about is that a lot of companies want to be everything to everybody. So these obviously it keeps the list quite long, but I think we've got to focus on really what's core to us, and then make sure that we're very specific about the requirements and the items that we need. You know, rather than being an inch deep and mile wide. So I suppose we've got to be everybody's got to be specific about their business and make sure that they've got not just one company that does everything and does everything reasonably well. We want good companies that do exactly what we want them to do and be able to perform. So I think if you want success in your business, you've got to be specific about what you're looking for. And that might be just to have a short list instead of a long list. So
that comes back to your original point of the planning as well,
absolutely,
right?
Yeah,
absolutely. Ali, anything to add?
Yeah, no, I think I would agree with most of my fellow partners, panelists. I think it's about asking the right questions and not asking every question.
Perfect, thank you. Sorry, there was another question, 2 other questions there.
Yeah, thank you very much for the insights. Actually related to the ESG reporting, I was doing a presentation like 6 months ago on the usage of AI and blockchain in order to fix the data and the information which you receive from your partners or respective suppliers in order not to repeat again the questionnaires. So the idea is as well literally to raise the knowledge of these suppliers or partners on a certain level that they will easily comply to the new ESG reporting system. And you don't need to, of course, then repetitive to fill. And once you raise them to a certain level, you have a trustful supplier or partner, and then it will be as well good for your literally green marketing rather than having these kind of greenwashing and digging deeper and failing to comply with the new, hopefully implemented laws for the future on the ESG reporting. So my point is, okay, why not using these kind of technologies, AI and blockchain, which were never mentioned in the last 2 days, which are the latest technology to help as well to create a sustainable standards for the industries?
Indeed.
Thank you.
Can I just get the next questions as well? And then we'll...
During COVID-19, we work in a medical services. We had to start field hospitals. And we had to source medical equipment, defibrillators, all type of medical diagnosis of it. And we couldn't find it because the shipping was closed and everything was a challenge. So what we did is we refurbished and we used a sustained machinery. But then the problem is we faced an accountant because these are assets and then depreciation and it was a challenging, but we had to use refurbished equipment by the end of the day, and it was successful. And actually, some company have awarded us contracts because we have used such a efficient and sustained idea. I just want to know what is the challenges using refurbished equipment, machinery, instead of having a new one.
Fantastic, thank you. Can we get the third and the last question as well, please, and then we'll bring it to a wrap.
Hi, everyone. We've heard today a lot about talking about moving towards sustainability in the supply chain. However, in the Middle East, there isn't much of, we haven't focused on organizations that are moving towards sustainability. And what is the starting point that companies should focus on to start implementing it in the supply chain? And do you think that implementing ICV, which is the in-country value, is a good starting point to implement it in companies to move towards sustainability in procurement or supply chain? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Julie, would you like to take first swing?
I think those three questions ran a lot of territory, so I'll just give my general opinions to this. The working with your supply chain is really dependent on the type of products you're receiving from them. So you really have to start with your highest impact suppliers. What's the greatest impact? If they're all equal, which they won't be, because of how much you purchase from them. But you have to pick the low-hanging fruit first. And that's my general opinion about how you prioritize within the supply chain. The supply chain, again, we have different pathways to the market as our company. We have our Bahrain plant, and then we have supplier networks. So the other important thing is, back to the point of not every supplier is created equal. So some suppliers are going to be able not to give you enough information. Some suppliers will give you too much. How do you balance that? Well, you have to establish, again, back to that word, partnerships with them. This is the type of things you talk to them about. You share resources. And to the gentleman's question about refurbished equipment, there's a fine line in between reusing equipment and then having antiquated equipment that uses too much electricity. In the textile world, if we have older equipment, it's burning electricity. Our Bahrain plant is what I consider just beautiful. They take high care of what they have to reduce our carbon footprint. I am a waste aversion, reuse crazy person. I love it. I love the concept of it. I do it in my daily life and my work life. So I am with you on that, and I applaud you for doing that. But it's not always practical when you're looking at Scope 1 and Scope 2s.
Thank you. John?
I'll try and answer those questions back to front. I think going back to the question around having the right kind of people on board with your company, people that can challenge the norm. So, obviously we have an extensive quality assurance side of our business. It's making sure that we've got champions inside our business that are going to drive these initiatives. And it may be that companies going forward need to have, depending on the size of the business, but you need to have an environmental champion, I suppose, for want of better words, that's inside your business, that's putting KPIs on our suppliers, putting KPIs on the clients that we deal with, and making sure that that's covered from an internal perspective. With regards to equipment and trying to maintain second-hand equipment or used equipment, it's very big in terms of most large companies trying to sweat the asset, as they say, try and get the most out of it. But there can be negatives with that as well, because nothing's built to last, unfortunately, in this world now. So there comes a time when you have to be able to do an evaluation on the equipment that you've got, whether it be capital equipment or anything from IT it may be, and then you've got to have a cut-off point to say, right, okay, this is just not cost effective. And then obviously, with antiquated equipment, there can be the environmental impact as well. So I suppose that's one side of looking at it. And then I think, the most important thing, just going back to the question on systems and data, I think I suppose we have to be realistic. There's two things that run a company. One is obviously people, and then the rest of it is data. We totally rely on data for every single facet of the business. So it's being able to understand that data and have people within the organisation that can disseminate that information and give us real information that we can utilise in our daily jobs. So I think data is key to everything. inside an organisation.
Yusuf, anything to add?
So, start with the use of AI for building questionnaires. So it's a very, very good point. We actually had our board meetings last week, and it was one of the things that our chairman has mentioned, that we need to leverage more AI, and it was mainly revolving around ESG reporting and gathering information related to that. So it's a very valid point, and I think that's where everyone is heading right now. Second question was on the use of refurbished equipment and the challenges. I mean, it depends on the kind of refurbishment. So you might run into issues like not being able to find spare parts if the equipment is no longer being supported by the OEM. So that's something to look out for. Is it energy efficient or not? And then John touched on the cost aspect. So if done right, refurbished equipment is definitely useful, but there are a lot of challenges, as was mentioned. On the starting point for sustainability, the ICV, in-country value, is definitely, could be positive if done right. Putting unrealistic quotas, for example, I'll take our organization. So with most of our copper being imported, saying you have an in-country value of, let's say, 60%, that's not realistic and it could never be achieved. And that actually drives manufacturers away from the region rather than into the region. But a good way to start is go to the basics and look within. I mean, packaging is if you produce a product, go look at the packaging. Most of the time, that's where all of the packaging is going to end up in landfills. And by building the partnerships with the customers, and if the customers are aware, you can tackle that. You mentioned plastic in the use of the reusing the plastic that's on there. I mean, that goes to the customer and ends up in a bin somewhere, right? So this usually could be the starting point.
Ali, any additional points to bring in?
Sure. Yeah, with regards to AI and data, I think, our environment these days is fast changing. And so those are tools that are becoming more and more critical to help us understand ourselves as an organization, our environment. So I think we're going to see more and more of that. In terms of, blockchain, I think it's still fairly new technology. I mean, there's some industries like art and others that are starting to use it, and I think that will only grow. And so as it becomes a little bit more commercialized and available for different applications, so I think the future there is bright. With regards to refurbished equipment, I think, again, it just depends on the condition, how efficient it is, the environmental impact. But at least for us, we don't rule out the use of such equipment, just whatever makes the most sense. And then with regard to just partners in country value, I think really with suppliers, for us at least here in the kingdom and the region, it's working with them and helping them also build a business case for localization that will provide, them and in the local environment the real benefits and in country value.
Fantastic, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, can you put your hands together for our panel?
Thank you very much, our dear panelists and moderator, for this session. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we've reached our last session of the day. Now we're going to end it with trends in climate reporting and disclosure. Regulatory compliance and reporting experts will examine trends and developments in sustainability regulation and disclosure globally, and new and developing MENA regulations aimed at encouraging greater climate disclosure. They will discuss the role of policymaking and whether more robust rules and incentives are needed from governments to accelerate private sector action. Experts will share opinions on what good reporting looks like, examples of MENA market leaders, and the most pressing challenges challenges that face companies as they seek or are mandated to ramp up disclosure. Lastly, the panel will address the impact of greenwashing labels that have driven many companies towards greenhushing and how clear regulation can encourage and give businesses greater comfort in sharing their climate commitments and agendas. Now, ladies and gentlemen, our speakers for this panel: Ali Al-Amr, Acting Director of Capital Market Supervision Directorate, Central Bank of Bahrain; Mr. Bender Al-Blahid, Client Relations Development Head, Saudi Exchange; Eleanor Livingston, Junior Partner, Zabian Partners; Elaine Hilal, Director, Investor Relations, Insurance and Corporate Secretary, ALBA; Simon Messenger, Market Engagement Fellow, IFRS Foundation; and our moderator, Damien Regan, Middle East Sustainability Reporting and Assurance Leader, Deloitte.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you very much for attending and remaining here this afternoon. I always think the last session is a tricky one, because of course maybe fewer people in the audience, but I always think they're the more committed sustainability champions, so thank you very much for staying. One of the advantages, however, of being at the end of the day is we can reflect on what's been presented over the last 2 days, effectively, both the workshops and the conference. And I think what struck me particularly was the number of times the word data came up, quality, the number of times reporting came up in different fields. So it's definitely a topic which I think is very relevant and very important to a number of the net zero commitments and initiatives taking place. So delighted, we've got a wonderful panel here today. Sarah's very kindly introduced, so I won't waste time by going back and repeating that, but we have a nice mix of companies, consultants, stock exchange and regulators here for you this afternoon. Now, it's a short 45 minutes, but we've got some great questions and very keen to take questions from yourselves towards the end. Now, clearly reporting has come again and again as being important to demonstrate monitoring, to demonstrate commitment by companies, to set targets. Data is very important to drive the whole process. So the robustness of that data and reporting is something which is, over a number of years, being challenged, and gradually we're seeing a movement towards really robust reporting. And what we want to do this afternoon is just to look at 3 key sort of trend areas. One, what's happening at the international level, what's happening globally, and the key markets driving things forward. What are they looking for? And then to drop down to the regional space. What are we seeing across this particular region and even in Bahrain itself? And then thirdly, what are the challenges that companies actually have as they move towards that expectation of robust information? So perhaps I'd like to start with Eleanor. Perhaps, Eleanor, you could describe for us the global trends of ESG reporting disclosure policy, particularly in the light of your experience in Australia and also in the EU.
I would say globally in general, it's ESG reporting has really become an enforcement priority, both in the financial services industries and for listed companies, obviously, as it has been for some years. But particularly in the EU, the UK, and in Australia, new directives and laws that are being introduced are now applying to smaller companies, wider industries, and they're also forcing companies now to carry on these obligations to their subsidiaries overseas, to potentially companies in their supply chains. So obligations are becoming higher and higher. Let's take EU for an example. They're really at the forefront of this ESG regulation now. We've had in place, obviously, several directives, in the past sort of 5 to 10 years. But the new Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which should come into force, I would say, by 2025 or 2026, this will have really wide-ranging implications for companies both in the EU and globally. For example, it will require companies to report on all of their subsidiaries overseas, on companies in their supply chains outside of the EU. Similarly, in Australia and in the UK, the FCA in the UK and the ASIC, the Australian Securities and Exchange Commission in Australia, have made it very, very clear that this is an enforcement priority. So even as recently as July in this year, we had a claim brought by ASIC against a superannuation fund, and there was a fine of about $11.5 million issued. So it's not something to be taken lightly at all. I think what's really important for companies in the MENA region is to appreciate that these global trends and these global directives that are being introduced, whether we like it or not, will affect us eventually in the next few years.
Very interesting point about it not taking it lightly. So
Yes.
one of the panelists earlier talked about the move from CSR, corporate social responsibility, to sustainability reporting. But now it seems to have a real financial implication.
Yes.
And real problems if you get it wrong, I suggest.
That's right, and I think this is compounded also by the lack of clarity in terms of the multitude of frameworks that companies have to choose from. So a lot of disputes that we see globally often concern either a misinterpretation of reporting requirements. So you have on one side greenwashing, where there's intentional misreporting, let's say. But what we see as well now is inadvertent misreporting, where companies simply don't understand or don't have the quality assurance from independent advisors or lawyers. And they're being faced with fines that, if they'd had better advice or if they'd understand their obligations more clearly, they may have avoided in the first place.
Fantastic. Well, certainly hold the thought on greenwashing. We'll come back to that later. But perhaps if we could take one of the points about the international reporting. And Simon, you've had a busy couple of days now. You did a session yesterday of the workshop, and then earlier this afternoon speaking about various things. But I think just coming back to the role that you have on the IFRS Foundation and your insight there, I'd be really, really keen just to understand a bit more about the number of voluntary and regulatory initiatives actually taking place, and what's actually happening, why they've been drafted.
Sure, so thank you for the question, and again, thank you for the invite to speak here today. So, in terms of the number of initiatives that exist right now, I guess is also one of the, a sub-question, which is which initiatives existed previously. And within that, there's a point which is important to be made, is that it's not a case of, a competition, so to speak, between one initiative and the other. There are, of course, some initiatives and regulations which are regional or region-specific. So if we're looking at all the work which is coming out in Europe at the moment, there's a policy driver behind that, which is absolutely valid, and it'd be the same in many other regions, whatever their policy, their cultural, their social requirements are. And within that, there obviously, has a consequence in terms of a need for data to be able to, monitor, see how they're doing, and actually meet the goals that they've set themselves. But from an international perspective, there were a number of initiatives that have existed, again, I'm going to say for a couple of decades. It's just simplifying the matter. And they were all looking to answer, in one way or another, slightly different elements relating to sustainability, different subset of questions or different subset of stakeholders. But to I'm going to say the common, it's not just the common person, to the common person or even to the semi-expert technical person who comes and looks at them, it's very difficult to really understand the slight nuance between one and the other. And there's the consequence of that, other than the fact that it's difficult to get your head around what's going on, that in terms of reporting, and Eleanor touched on that just before in terms of talking about from the European angle, it does go beyond the borders to companies which are working as part of the supply chain with other actors in Europe. There's a huge reporting requirement which is coming in. And what the ISSB is looking to do in terms of your question, like what are we looking to do? And I know that, we would have heard at different times that, another standard is looking to complicate the equation. It's the entire opposite that it's looking to do. It's really looking to ultimately make life easier in terms of the preparers to be able to have fewer different elements of reporting to do. That doesn't mean that it's looking to replace reporting requirements. At the end of the day, and I touched on it earlier, every regulator decides what one needs to report in different jurisdictions. What the ISSB is looking to do is to create this global baseline so that if a regulator or another initiative, whatever, is asking for a certain data point in a region, then it's the same language that is being used, the same metric that needs to be, it's framed with the same metric in another region. Therefore, instead of having two separate calculations that needs to be done, there's just one. And of course here I'm not necessarily talking about one or two, I'm actually talking about potentially 20, 30 and many more. So that is the idea, is really in terms of harmonizing the work that has been done previously, leveraging all of the work of all the experts in the market, the investors, the regulators from the last couple of decades, and coming up with a solution that really helps create cost-effective standards, but also decision-useful standards in terms of the end user.
So what do these new standards mean and imply for companies themselves? Do they have to report?
So it's a very good point. So conceptually, we'll link to that. If we take the International Accounting Standards, so the IASB, which many, if not all of you, will be aware of, essentially it's the standards related to financial reporting. Right now, if you when a company produces their financial information, they have their financial statement, and there will be a sentence which says that it's been done in accordance with the IASB standard, the auditor will sign off and so forth, but that's that. There isn't a separate IASB standard. And that is the same in terms of the ISSB. The idea isn't to create a new report, a new ISSB report per se, is to make sure that the standards in terms of the metrics, the topics, are, if they're deemed to be material by the regulator or by other actors, are then integrated and said in a certain manner within the traditional financial statements. So in terms of what they need to do now, the important point, which I was saying, it's a voluntary initiative at this stage, and ultimately the IFRS Foundation has no authority themselves to mandate anything to anyone. What happens is that regulators then endorse it and mandate it in some instances, well, in many instances in terms of the IASB, and that is the conversations we're having with many countries at the moment in terms of what are the next steps, the process. It's impossible to say when different regions or different countries will be adopting them, but realistically, in terms of the consultation processes that need to take place and so forth, it's not something that's going to happen, I'm going to exaggerate, say tomorrow. It's not something that's going to happen in the next 6 months or so. It's something that usually takes multiple years in terms of consultation to understand the maturity of the market, what is being done, how prepared, how feasible it is, what additional, reliefs need to be added from a regional context, if there are additional topics that need to be added because they're regionally important, and a bit of nuances like that. But the action I'd recommend that everyone, if it's relevant to your role, does, is at least to look at these standards to see what topics they're asking, see how it fits within the processes that you already have, the data that you have, because one can't say that it will happen, but there's a very high likelihood that there is going to be a requirement at some point. Again, I can't comment individually on any jurisdiction in terms of reporting it. Even if it doesn't happen in the jurisdiction where you're based, if you're part of a value chain of someone else who is based in a jurisdiction where it's being asked of them, then they're going to be trying to get the data from you. So this is a global initiative, a global development, which naturally is likely to have an impact wherever you're based in the world if you're an international organization.
Okay. So even though it's not necessarily adopted yet in Bahrain or Middle East, in the territories, it's still of interest to companies to be aware of what's actually happening globally? Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. It's the nature of the global world these days. People operate in a global landscape, especially from a... when we've heard it throughout the day in terms of the importance of whether it's green finance, sustainable finance, low carbon finance, whatever the terminology, there's a huge demand or huge interest from the, and it's not even interest, it's strategic priorities in terms of international international investors to really be able to understand what they're doing in terms of investments, what is the carbon impact of the investments and so forth. So there's a huge driver coming from, a number of actors, but in particular the financial institutions, whether they're local ones, regional ones, or international ones, who are asking for this data. They are the driver initially behind the creation of the ISSB, as responding to their needs that it was formed, and they will be asking for the data in the future.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that. I'd like to just come back to Eleanor and then maybe Lean, and just try and find out a little bit more about how does this all impact, do we think, here in the Middle East, from your thoughts? Are these standards, are these requirements actually driving different things here? Maybe IPOs or maybe other financial due diligence? We're very curious.
Sure. I think, as I said before, often we're under a sort of a false pretense that, overseas regulations and directives don't directly affect us. But they will. I think through a number of ways. First of all, as I said before, there's this trickle-down effect of overseas companies with branches or subsidiaries here all companies in their supply chain that are affected by these very, very stringent and robust directives in the EU, in the UK, in the US now even, and in Australia. Just from an investor perspective in general, foreign investors, I think more and more will start insisting on ESG clauses, ESG warranties and indemnities in their contracts with the MENA companies. This is something that we can't avoid because they have to meet their legal obligations back home. So even where, for example, we don't necessarily have these high-profile regulatory investigations or disputes in the MENA region yet, but even where cases don't make it to court, even reputational damage has a trickle-down effect. So I think it was a Grantham Institute report from last year or the year before found that even just from filing a case, there's a 1 to 2% drop in share prices of companies, even if there's not an unfavourable judgment at the end. And that's always going to have an effect on the subsidiary here, on the branches here. I think as well, investor confidence obviously is something we always have to worry about. Obviously in the MENA region, foreign investment is a huge part of the economy. And if investor confidence drops because we're not complying with overseas directives, that will have a direct impact on us. And finally, I think MENA companies who want to, for example, enter into the Euro single market, they will of course have to, there are conditions attached to entering that market. And now that mandatory reporting is applying not just to financial institutions and listed companies, it's applying to SMEs and it will apply to supply chains, as we said before. This will become mandatory for anyone wishing to enter the EU single market.
That's great. Well, think about it. So it's got a large impact on companies driven by the international regulatory drivers and also investors and other things. So curious, Aline, just how this all impacts a companies that are doing reporting in the region itself. And what's your thoughts on GRI and IFRS 1 and 2 and et cetera, et cetera? How are the companies dealing with these drivers?
First, I would like to say thank you for having me in this panel, and I'm not sure which kind of message I will mention. I'm going to be a little bit bold, but I'll say it in any case. Working in a corporate, we have started to get slightly confused between all the different, I would say, regulations and guidelines that we have to adhere to. I was having a chat with Ali a while back, and I told him, lucky you are, you're representing the regulator. You can either say you are in compliance or you're not in compliance. But for us, ALBA, and I'm sure you know that, Damien, we've been reporting on GRI for the last 3 years. GRI is a very comprehensive framework where we report on the material topics that we try to gauge from our company and different stakeholders, including regulators and investors. Now, going back to what you stated a while back about the effectiveness of IFRS S1 and S2, we will start doing that. So although it's going to be effective in 2024, but I will consider, thank you, I will consider our reporting for 2023 as, if you want, as a pilot for us to, I would say, to practice and to get better before it becomes effective in 2024 reporting. However, and I'm here, I'm gonna have the investor's hat. Like, for instance, our main shareholders who resides in Europe in particular, they are more in favor of GRI when compared to TCFD. Some investors would like us to do more on the carbon disclosure projects. So I think being a public, working for a public listed company, I would like to see, if you want, I want to see all these regulations aligning all together, because we don't want to report for different, I mean, if investors would like us to report on CDP, from being working for an aluminium company, we have to keep reporting on GRI because we lose our Aluminium Stewardship Initiative certificate. So it's a little bit confusing because we keep reporting, and there are lots of interrelation between TCFD, between GRI, and now with IFRS S1 and S2. So from my perspective, I want to see everyone, all stakeholders being aligned on which framework companies have to adopt to start reporting. Otherwise, you only do reporting.
So the difficulty is the multiplicity of stakeholders, users, the frameworks. It's all different. Well, one of the panelists earlier gave an interesting observation. It says they're coming at us from all angles or all sides, and I think that's exactly what's happening. It sounds. Is that correct?
Yes, and I would like to add another thing. We are, despite the reporting, and for instance, in our case, we're reporting on the GRI. Investors also are not, they would like us as well to get quality assurance. So it's not really only about the reporting, but you need to have third-party assurance. I'm an investor myself, and I definitely won't entertain looking at any disclosure if it's not audited. So we don't mind. We love to get the quality assurance, and it's actually Deloitte who performs the quality assurance on our ESG reporting. So I would like also that, I would like this to be seen, integrated as well, that it's not only about reporting, because everyone can report, but then you need consistency in reporting, you need to have factual data, you don't want to do greenwashing. She was telling us previously about a suit, so you don't want to be in a position where you start greenwashing unintentionally. That would kill the reputation of the company and will give the investor a very different perception about the identity of the company.
That's great. Well, certainly we'll pick up assurance a little bit later, actually. And when we think about the operational difficulties, let's say, of hitting all these requirements, but certainly from a global international presence, new standards coming through, new expectations, legal ramifications if things are going wrong, and things like insurance. There's a lot of pressure, I think, on companies coming through, but also on local stock exchanges and regulators. And if we drop down to sort of the regional landscape now, well, what's happening here? I'm based in Dubai. I've been there for a number of years, and over that period I've actually seen the UAE stepping forward with mandatory GRI for listed companies. We saw Jordan last year step forward for mandatory GRI reporting. Oman has just picked up the GCC Steering Committee metrics and also GRI reporting. So a lot's happening in the region, but I'm delighted here to have someone from the KSA and Bahrain to talk us through what's happening in your respective territories. So perhaps Bandar, you could start with yourself. What's the Saudi Stock Exchange position with regard to ESG for companies listed on the stock exchange?
Thank you so much for having me here. And maybe before I speak about the Saudi exchange, let me take a step back. As you all know, Saudi Arabia is embarking on the 2030 transformational program, and sustainability plays a vital role in that. A lot of programs and initiatives have been diverged because of this 2030 program. So, for example, the Saudi Green Initiative, there is a lot of projects in terms of renewable energy, a lot of projects in terms of decarbonization, in terms of green and blue hydrogen, for example. And the fact of the matter, many of the publicly listed companies in Saudi do take part into these projects. So we have a lot of companies, blue chips, mega companies that are really well informed and are leaders when it comes to ESG, but also on the other side of the spectrum, we do have a lot of companies, the small and medium ones specifically, that are struggling when it comes to ESG. And so our position really is to help facilitate the transition of these companies, to help educate them, to help see all of this go. And rightfully so, it was mentioned here today that investors take these things very seriously. And if you ask IR guys in the kingdom or in the region, what is the number one question by foreign investors? It will be about ESG and sustainability. So a lot of the companies are already feeling the pressure that they need to work towards disclosing their sustainability needs and goals. The Saudi exchange, for example, have done a lot in terms of awareness. In fact, we're only the second exchange globally that did training on ISSB standards. we're also doing a lot in terms of helping, with the guidelines. We have our guidelines since 2021, and we're also part of the GCC ESG committee and the ESG standards. But this has helped us realize a couple of facts, and the most important thing is that many of the companies in the region, and Saudi Arabia specifically, they do a lot in terms of sustainability, or ESG specifically, but they do not disclose it in the right venues. So they're doing fantastic work in terms of the social side, amazing work in terms of the environmental and the governance, of course, because we have very strict regulators in the region. So our main hope is to help them disclose these in the right venues. So we're doing a lot of work towards that. And we also have established a new company in partnership with the Public Investment Fund of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and that is the Regional Voluntary Carbon Market Company. It started operating, done a couple of mega auctions for regional companies. The last one was around 2.2 million metric tons. And this shows that many of those companies do take this issue seriously.
I would have added, we could borrow your microphone. I've got a couple of follow-up questions. So we were talking earlier actually about sorry, if I just another question, the steering committee metrics. We were just talking about your involvement on there. Could you just give us a little bit more information about those metrics?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's part of the GCC exchanges steering committee. They work on many different pillars and tracks, and obviously one of them is the ESG, which is one of the most important ones. So we aligned with global partners to see what are the most important aspects when it comes to ESG and metrics. So one of them was the Sustainable Stock Exchanges initiative by the United Nations, and we adopted their ESG metrics as with all the exchanges in the region. That's the number one thing. But I guess this is just the start. This is just the beginning. The idea here is just to introduce it to the region. And we would love to see the companies in the region grow and adopt ESG metrics organically and not because they're forced to do so. And we've seen those numbers increase. I mean, just in the case of Saudi Arabia, for example, within 1 year, the percentage of companies that disclose ESG increased from 8% to 30%. The number of ESG-specific funds and asset managers globally have increased tenfold in the last couple of years in Saudi Arabia. The number of Saudi companies that are in international ESG indices has doubled within a year. So this just tells you that everything that we're working on actually is yielding results.
That's great. And do we expect an announcement at any point with regard to mandatory reporting of the GCC metrics or adoption of IFRS or potentially GRI? Is that something in the works?
Yeah, so that's very interesting. In case of Saudi Arabia, in early 2023, the Saudi exchange or the Saudi Tadawul Group generally signed a trilateral agreement with the regulator, the Capital Market Authority, and the Ministry of Economy and Planning. And that agreement and MOU will tackle three main things. Number one is awareness and training in terms of ESG and sustainability. Number two, develop ESG taxonomy for the kingdom. And number three, develop ESG standards in Saudi Arabia. Of course, we cannot do it alone. We're working with many partners, whether in the private sector or the government level, but also with international entities. And these includes, the standard setters, the private organizations, just to understand how the global trend is working and was moving towards. GRI obviously is a very interesting, standard, IFRS obviously, and we're taking all of this into consideration when we look at the Saudi standard. The main thing is that we will not deviate away from international best practices. Our main goal really is to introduce some of the aspects that is emerging market specific, that is Saudi and regional specific, that makes sense. At the end of the day, it's going to be, honestly, very unfair to treat emerging markets the way you treat developed markets, for example. And we've spoken with many of the investors, and they say, I don't expect you to operate as a company in Europe or in the US, I'm actually more interested to see who work towards advancing and moving towards that that level.
That's fantastic. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing what Saudi goes towards and moves towards and the committee's working on, because where you go, I think a lot of us will very, very quickly follow in this market. Which takes us to Bahrain, because I think there was an announcement at the end of last year, practically, which talked about your regulatory move forward on reporting. Could you elaborate on that, please?
Yes, I would say that our regulation is well studied and incremental. It all started when in 2020 when Bahrain Bourse introduced the voluntary ESG reporting for the publicly listed companies. The year after, the central bank issued its first climate-related risk circular disclosures for companies to raise awareness within their organization. Just 5 months after that, another circular was issued by the central bank, along with the guidance note. And in the same year, we issued a survey to gauge the readiness and awareness of the industry in terms of their preparation, reporting an ESG report. Building on all this, we drafted our first regulation, circulated in the industry for consultation and feedback, and we issued it last November, making it mandatory for all companies to issue their ESG report for the year ended 2024. 2 days ago, the central bank issued another circular for the banks, just to raise awareness about the latest consultation paper that was issued by Basel Committee. We noticed from our survey that the companies a lot of them are well aware of the ESG report and are keen to meet the stakeholders' expectation by issuing this report, thanks to the exchange regulation that came out in 2020 that made a lot of our companies prepared and aware. Currently, we have 25% of our listed companies reporting their ESG report. Most of them use the GRI, and we're looking to see 100% compliance by the end of this year.
Fantastic, fantastic. So what I'm seeing here perhaps is a lot of very, very compliance-led reporting. Would that be fair? Do you think more regulation should be done? Do you think more of this driving forward by the stock exchange and regulators would improve reporting and make it happen? Or
this is the first year the regulation will come into mandatory. We are waiting that we made sure that our regulation is flexible and allow companies to not to take it hard from the beginning. Definitely, we'll take after the first year, we will take every report into consideration and be reviewed. And if a necessary regulation deems necessary, we will review our regulations to be updated with the market.
That's fantastic. So I think the regulators, certainly in the region, are moving towards that mandatory reporting style, whether it's GRI or GCC metrics, or potentially the new coming through.
Yes. I just want to let you know that us at the Central Bank of Bahrain, we are a member of the ISCO, and the ISCO endorsed the ISSB just 1 month after it was issued. And in the last committee meetings, the chairman of the ISCO explained to us why this happened, because I was personally surprised. There was a lot of standard that have been out there for years that has never been endorsed. However, the ISB came out just a month and it was endorsed by ISCO. He mentioned that during the phase of preparing the regulation, the framework, they've been in continuous contact with the IFRS and all the consideration of the capital market regulation were taken into consideration in the preparation of the ISSB.
Okay, fantastic. That's terrific. So we've touched on two of the big sort of themes, the international and then sort of regional. And I'd like to come back to probably the third theme that we sort of touched on today, and that's the importance of robust ESG information. And perhaps I could come back to Eleanor and Elaine, actually, just talking a little bit more about topics you touched on earlier very briefly, which was the importance of getting the information right, potentially for legal reasons, and Elaine, potentially for financial products, and the link through to uses of reporting thereafter. But Eleanor, anything else to add about the importance of this data and why it should be so robust?
Yeah, I think the importance of the accuracy of the data can't be overstated.
Mm-hmm.
The legal consequences, I mean, we've seen since 2015, I think there's been over 2,000 ESG disputes. And if it puts it into perspective, I think a quarter of them have been in the last 2 or 3 years, which shows the rate at which these are, becoming commonplace. Usually, I mean, from the regulatory side, these are usually brought by either financial services regulators, consumer affairs regulators. We spoke about, obviously, the fines that these may entail, the reputational damage that this may entail. But there's also, we've seen a sort of a diversion now globally to different sorts of awards being handed down. So in terms of shareholder actions, for example, usually with a shareholder claim, ESG claim, you would need to show some sort of financial loss. So a drop in share price, due to reputational damage, showing that, they wouldn't have, for example, the Volkswagen case. The claimants in this case were shareholders who claimed that they wouldn't have bought the shares or they would have sold the shares in advance had they known about this emissions scandal. I'm sure you're all familiar with this case. Now what we're seeing is courts starting to get a little bit more creative and handing down awards to shareholders and investors where there's been no financial loss, but there's been what they call moral or emotional harm. So, for example, an investor who prides themselves on investing or being involved in products that are green, and then to find out that, in fact, all of their monetary investment was going into, let's say, for example, high carbon emitting projects. So this is the scope of awards and the scope of legal consequences that we might face are growing exponentially. I think another thing that companies have to keep in mind is that directors can be held personally liable now. So it's really important that, from the top level, I always say to companies it's handy to either have an ESG committee or a board member who has experience in ESG, because it can entail personal liability now. So it's definitely not to be taken lightly.
That's very interesting. It ties into something I read on LinkedIn yesterday, actually. We said in France that potentially there may be jail time for people who don't do sustainability reporting. Yeah. I don't know, Simon, if that's something you've read. If you're being based in France, but is that likely to come through? Not just a fine, but jail time?
I mean, without commenting too much on the French approach to legal consequences, I mean, yes, so I guess one point in general is that in any external communication, there's a liability element to it, which is why we're referring there to the importance of, certainly limited assurance right now, but reasonable assurance in due course when it's possible. So any information that you disclose, and it's a lot more consequential in certain jurisdictions, notably like in the USA, has a potential consequence in terms of litigation. So from the French perspective, realistically, what tends to happen, yes, if there's a huge manipulation of the data to really mislead people, who knows, it could be, realistically, it's usually a slap on the hands and there will be a fine and so forth. But from a legislative perspective, sure, there may be legal threats, but that's just the French context in terms of how they set things up. But from a real important materiality perspective, there are serious consequences to misleading investors, whichever jurisdiction you're in. So the accuracy of the data is critical. That doesn't mean that, and it goes back to the point we were discussing this morning, that you can't move until you have perfect data. You just have to be clear about, transparent about the processes you've taken to get there, and how much one can rely on this data, what assumptions are made, and what caveats you put in there.
That's great, and that takes me to Aline. I'm just thinking here, in terms of the data being correct, there's financial implications as well because it's linked to products, loans, and various other things, correct?
Yes, I can share our experience with that. Last year, Alba has refinanced its syndicated commercial loan, and we have linked it to ESG targets. As a result, we have to report, we chose the KPIs along with the banks. And of course, we had the targets, and as long as we're paying back the loan, now we have to report on the actual achievements for each of the targets. So reporting is not enough. And since Alba since we started actually getting the quality assurance exercise. We tend to report or to publish the ESG report. We no longer call it sustainability, it's called ESG report within December, within the first week or second week of December of each year. Compiling or gathering the data to build the actual ESG report, it takes from us about 6 months. And it takes us about 4 to 5 months to get the quality assurance depending on the number of KPIs and the exercise on which we want to engage the auditor. Yes, the banks consortium wants us not only to report, they want to have the stamp of a third party to make sure that what we are reporting is correct. Not only that, once you provide them with the quality assurance statement on the 3 KPIs, in our case it's 3 KPIs, the story does not stop there. Last year we've been asked to see if we can actually tighten more the targets. So it's a debate between us and the banks, but having quality assurance, definitely it's a vote of confidence for the banks and of course for the investors, because today if you're reporting on anything, I don't want to be quoted, but it can be, maybe now that you're seated next to me, we as a human being tend to share the stories. You know, when it goes viral, each one will spice it up. So 6.2%, no, it's 6.5, no, it's about 6. So it depends on who's saying and what we are saying. But once you have the stamp, it's like when you are auditing your financials. So when you have the financials audited, you know, everyone will definitely have a vote of confidence in the results that you are providing, whether it is for your shareholders, for your own, as employees, regulators, investors. And despite all of that, my personal opinion is that you don't need to have a policy or a regulation to tell you that you have to report what is right. So to me, you should always report at face value. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult because you have to convince the parties that you are working with about the consequences or what could be the repercussions from reporting, for potentially reporting not the real story or what is really happening. But that's an ongoing, I would say, constructive discussion with the management, and it is our duty or our responsibility to flag such issues. I mean, with what has happened in Volkswagen recently, I mean, if you keep quiet, at some point in time, maybe you might be actually subject to such. You don't want to be in that situation. This is no longer I would say, a voluntary reporting. ALBA is about to start its 8th year for ESG reporting. So year after year, we're getting better. I'm not saying it's getting easier. No, it's not getting easier. And I think in 2023, because we have opted to report not only on GRI, but to also start reporting at least on IFRS S1, it's going to be more difficult for me and my team to get this done. And I think it also could be difficult on the auditors who will be providing quality assurance, because it's going to be the first year. So I don't think we're the only one in that train. So we have also other stakeholders where they will also have to stretch their minds into how to conduct this audit because it's relatively something new.
That's great. Well, thank you very much. But we're just about out of time, I think. I'd encourage you to catch up with people, possibly at the end, just afterwards, with any questions. Although Ali, I think over there, is definitely waving his hand. If we could just take one question, maybe, and then do we have a microphone?
Thank you, Damien. Good afternoon. I have actually 2 questions, okay? If you can let me the first question is fast, just is for Mr. Bender. Welcome back, welcome to Bahrain. We want just to know, we are eager to know when your tailor-made standards will be published, or when you are expecting. This is my first question. Or maybe you can say it as mid of this year, end of this year. My second question is for Mr. Ali Al-Amr. Looking forward, after 1 year, when all the 100% 350 companies who have to report to CBB, they publish them report. Like in the case of ALBA, they have sustainability linked finance that the bank tightened them to reduce and improve them reduction. What is the driving force that maybe CBB will put so the story not just will be reporting, the story will be improving and going into the net zero? There will be the ESG rating into that picture, or you have other things in mind? Thank you so much.
Can I take this? Yeah, answering the question to us, I'd say still, as I said today, it's still a little early for us to decide what we're going to do next. But it is difficult for us. Why? Because we have now the exchange's framework for publishing the ESG report, and we have ours. We are similar, maybe one different KPI, we just different. We can't be the same for one main reason, because the one for the exchanges is for publicly listed companies. However, the one issued by the central bank is for all banks, insurance firms, and investment firms. Each might have its own different KPI requirement. I mentioned earlier, just 2 days ago, we circulated climate for the banks, the Basel climate consultation for the banks to be more aware. This is only related to the banks because for Basel. So having a unified for all the industries might be difficult at this stage. So let's wait by the end of this year. We might see just 2 months ago, ISSB observed the TCFD. We don't know what's going to happen by the end of the year. Maybe how the GRI and the ISB will work together. Or maybe another framework will be observed by the ISB or by the GRI. So I would say it's early for us to give a clear answer on this.
Thank you so much. As you can imagine, many entities are working together to develop the Saudi standards, whether it's government, regulators, even private entities. So it might take a little bit of time. However, I hope by this year we will be able to do a public consultation on the Saudi standards. So that's also something that we would love to do before we go live with it.
That's great. Well, thank you, and thank you very much for the questions, Ali. So I think just to summarize very briefly, on the global landscape, we've got new standards coming in, new investor expectations, potential legal action because of the data needs to be right and messaging needs to be right. So a lot of drivers there. Locally, regionally, we're seeing stock exchange regulators stepping up and insisting or making compliant or providing requirements and guidance for listed companies, which is great to see. But again, in the backdrop of incoming investors helping to raise the expectations. And the third landscape picture here is coming through this robust data, very, very important for legal reasons, for demonstrating what companies are actually doing, and making things right. And in many ways, the data needs to be as important as financial data. It's being used in very much a similar way. So I'd like to thank the panelists today for your insights. Thank you all very much. It's been thoroughly interesting to hear that, and it ties up this conference very nicely. And thank you all for staying and providing interest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, our dear panelists and moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to remind you that at 6:30, the American Chamber of Commerce of Bahrain, CFA Society Bahrain, and Bahrain India Society, in partnership with Sustainability for Middle East, cordially invites you to the joint members event of the year. It will be talking about sustainable real estate and infrastructure development. It will be right here at 6:30, moderated by Ms. Ziba Askar, President of CFA Society Bahrain, with our speakers, Ms. Eleanor Livingston, Zarbi and Partners, and Mudaf Bagwat, founding partner, 2000 Watt Smart Cities Association. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, we come to the end of the second edition of Sustainability for Middle East. Thank you very much for a day of great and interactive discussions and many insights from our speakers and from you, dear delegates. And we hope that it did accelerate implementation to achieving net zero. Thank you very much, and we hope to see you in the future.